There is one thing that almost no one knows about Julius Caesar. He was not the first to want to turn Rome into an empire. He was not the richest, nor the most beloved, nor even the most brilliant strategist of his time. There were men more powerful than him, men with more armies, more gold, more name, and yet all of them ended up dead, exiled, or kneeling before him. Why Caesar and not them? That is exactly what we are going to unearth today, because the history of Julius Caesar is not the one you were told. It is not that of the man who came, saw, and conquered. It is the story of someone who was about to amount to nothing, a man who in his early years was nothing more than a young aristocrat without money, with debts so deep that a bad year would have been enough to erase him from history forever. A man who was captured by pirates when he was 25 years old, who laughed with them, who promised to come back to hang them, and who, when they released him, did exactly that. That anecdote already tells you everything you need to know about him. Caesar was not just ambitious. He was the type of person who turns humiliation into fuel. Rome in the century before Christ was a pot about to explode. Technically, it was a republic with its senate, its consuls, its laws. But in practice, it was a battlefield between powerful families that had spent decades accumulating private armies, buying votes and eliminating rivals. The system was so rotten inside that almost no one believed it could be saved. And in that environment, Caesar was born, the year 100 before Christ, in the heart of a patrician family with a family tree that reached back to the gods, but with coffers practically empty. His uncle was Marius, one of the most legendary generals of Rome, and his connection to Marius would cost him almost his life when Sulla, the political enemy of Marius, took control of the city. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce his wife, Cornelia, daughter of an ally of Marius. Caesar refused. He was 16 years old. At 16 years old, he had already decided that he was not going to bend the knee before anyone. Sulla was about to have him executed, and only the intervention of influential friends saved his head. But Sulla, the chronicles say, said something that would remain engraved in the memory of Rome. In that young man there are many Mariuses. Caesar fled from Rome and enrolled in the army. And here is where something changes in a way that has no name, because it was in the army where Caesar discovered that he was a born leader, not just in battle, in the daily life of the soldier, in the way he sat down to eat with his men, in how he learned their names, in how he shared the marches and the cold with them, when he could have stayed in a warm tent. His soldiers did not respect him only for his rank. They followed him because they felt that Caesar saw them as people, not as tools. That was extraordinarily rare in the Rome of his time. After the death of Sulla, Caesar returned to Rome and began to build his political career from the bottom. And when I say from the bottom, I mean it. To buy political favors, to organize public shows that would earn him the affection of the people. Caesar went into debt to levels that today would seem absurd to us. It is calculated that at some point he owed the equivalent of what would be an enormous fortune. Even for current standards, his creditors were mainly Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who saw in Caesar something worth financing. And Crassus was not the type of person who bet poorly. Here is something that almost all history books omit. Caesar was tribune, aedile, praetor, supreme pontiff. He was climbing up each step of Roman politics with a calculated patience that clashes with the image of the impulsive conqueror that many have of him. Because Caesar was not impulsive. He was exactly the opposite. Every movement was thought out. Every alliance had a purpose. Every public generosity had a calculated effect on the perception that the people had of him. He was, in the most modern sense of the word, a political strategist of a precision that terrified his rivals. And if you enjoy this type of story where reality surpasses any fiction, consider subscribing, because what is coming on this channel is exactly that. History without filters, without false ornaments, told as it deserves to be told, in the year 60 before Christ. Caesar did something that changed the history of the West forever. He formed a secret alliance with the two most powerful men in Rome, Pompey, the most famous general of the moment, victorious in the East, with loyal legions that adored him, and Crassus, the man whose fortune sustained half of Rome. The three together formed what history would call the First Triumvirate, an alliance that was not on any official paper, that had no legal name, that the Senate did not vote on or approve. It was simply an agreement between three men who had decided that they three together were stronger than all the institutions of the Republic. And so it was. Caesar was elected consul the following year, the highest office of the Republic, and from there he began to move the pieces that would lead him to his destiny. But the consulate lasted 1 year. 1 year was not enough for what Caesar had in mind. He needed time, and time meant a province to govern, to have armies under his command, to accumulate military glory and wealth that he could turn into political power. And he got exactly that. The command over Gaul, the vast territory that today occupies France, part of Belgium and the north of Italy. What happened in the 9 years that Caesar spent in Gaul is one of the most brutally effective episodes of the military history of humanity. 9 years, 8 campaigns, more than 300 tribes subdued. It is calculated that in those wars around 1 million Gauls lost their lives and that another 1 million were enslaved. The figures are so large that they almost lose meaning. But the point is not the figure. The point is this. A man who 10 years earlier could not pay his debts returned from Gaul with an army of veterans who adored him, with enough gold to buy wills in Rome and with a military reputation that no one could question. While Caesar was in Gaul, however, the triumvirate was crumbling. Crassus died in a disastrous military campaign in the east, facing the Parthians, and Pompey, without the balance that Crassus represented, began to move closer to the Senate, to the Optimates, to the traditional enemies of Caesar. The alliance was cooling slowly with the coldness of things that break before anyone dares to admit it, and then came the moment that no one in Rome would ever forget. The Senate, pressured by Pompey and the senators who saw in Caesar an existential threat to the Republic, ordered him to dissolve his armies and return to Rome as a private citizen before presenting himself to the next elections. It was a perfect trap. Without armies, without military power, Caesar would be vulnerable to a political trial that could destroy him. His enemies knew it. Caesar too. The 1st of January of the year 49 before Christ, Caesar was with a single legion on the banks of a small, almost insignificant river, which marked the border between his province and Italy proper. The river was called Rubicon. Crossing it with an army was illegal. It was declaring war on Rome. It was treason. Caesar spent hours deliberating, hours that his officers remembered always. And then he said a phrase that the Latins knew, a phrase of the dice of the players. The die is cast, and he crossed the river. What came after was a civil war that shook the known world. Pompey fled to Greece before Caesar reached Rome. Italy fell into the hands of Caesar in less than 60 days, a speed that left friends and enemies alike stunned, then Spain, then Greece. In the year 48 before Christ, in the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar defeated Pompey so crushingly that the most famous general of Rome had to flee towards Egypt looking for refuge. And in Egypt, the worst possible betrayal awaited him. The ministers of the young Pharaoh Ptolemy ordered him executed to curry favor with Caesar. When Caesar arrived and they presented him with the head of Pompey, the chronicles say that he wept. He was his enemy, but he had been his ally, his son-in-law, someone with whom he had shared years of ambition and power. The death of Pompey was not the triumph that Caesar expected. It was the beginning of something more complicated. In Egypt, Caesar met Cleopatra. She was about 21 years old. He was 52. And here comes something that many do not know. Cleopatra did not come to Caesar as a triumphant queen. She came wrapped in a rug, or according to other versions, in a cloth sack, smuggled into the palace to avoid the guards of her brother who wanted to see her dead. That was the first thing Caesar saw of her. Not a grandiose entrance, but a woman who had turned desperation into ingenuity. She must have reminded him of someone he knew very well. Caesar supported Cleopatra, restored her to the throne, and spent months in Egypt when Rome needed him in another place. His critics never forgave him, but Caesar never operated according to the times that others marked for him. When he finally returned to the Roman world, there were still battles to be fought in Africa, in Spain, against the sons of Pompey, who continued to resist. But towards the year 45 before Christ, the civil war had ended. Caesar was the most powerful man in the known world, and then he did something that confused all his contemporaries and continues to be debated 2,000 years later. Instead of becoming king, he accepted the title of dictator in perpetuity. Dictator in Rome was not a word with the negative charge it has today. It was a recognized position, used in emergencies, with extraordinary and temporary powers. But in perpetuity was something else. In perpetuity was forever. And in a republic that had been functioning for centuries on the principle that no one could have power forever, that word was a declaration of war on everything that Rome claimed to do. What came next was prepared in the shadows for months. A group of senators, some of them men whom Caesar had pardoned after they fought against him in the Civil War, formed a conspiracy. Among them was Brutus, whom Caesar considered almost as a son. The 15th of March of the year 44 before Christ, in the hall of the Senate, Caesar was surrounded. They handed him a petition. When he began to read it, the senators lunged at him with their daggers. He received 23 wounds. Only one was mortal. And yet, the death of Caesar did not restore the Republic. On the contrary, it opened the door to the longest and bloodiest chaos that Rome had seen in generations. Mark Antony, Octavian, Lepidus, another civil war, and in the end, Octavian, the adopted nephew of Caesar. The heir that Caesar had chosen in his will ended up becoming Augustus, the first Roman emperor. What Caesar could not achieve in life, his heir consolidated after his death. Here's the question that pursues me every time I think about this story. Did Caesar know that he was going to die? There are those who say they warned him, that a soothsayer told him to beware of the Ides of March, that his wife Calpurnia dreamed of blood and begged him not to leave that day. And yet, he went. Why did he go? Some historians say it was carelessness. Others say that he was the type of man who could not show himself with fear, neither before his enemies nor before himself. And others, the most interesting ones, say that Caesar understood something that very few people understand about power, that there are moments in history where your death is worth more than your life, that he had given Rome everything he could give it in life, and that his legacy, the name Caesar, the title that 2,000 years later would continue to be used in the form of Kaiser and Tsar, that legacy could only be completed with martyrdom. If that is true or not, no one can know. But we do know this: the man who crossed the Rubicon with a single legion, the man who went into debt up to his neck to buy the favor of the people, the man who spent 9 years in Gaul building the army with which he would change the world. That man turned Rome into something that has not disappeared entirely in 2 millennia. He did not build the empire, but without him the empire would not exist. And that for a man who started without money, persecuted, about to be executed at 16 years old, is not bad at all.